It was, I just started the recording. It was Joy who alerted me to your conference coming up. And I was
Joy's always looking out.
Yeah, she always looking out. It's such an important conversation to me because we don't focus enough on rites of passage when it comes to death rites, death rituals. We don't even focus enough on elderhood in general. We talk about honoring ancestors all day long. We talk about, propitiating ancestors all day long, but we never talk about the elders. What about the elders? What about their transition stages and eras? So the work that you're doing is deeply important. So I want to go ahead and introduce Victoria Snowden, born and raised in rural Georgia on Muscogee land that was known as Thronateeska. Is that right? Thronateeska, meaning flint. Victoria is an AuDHDer who delves into the magic of her Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, and Louisiana roots to carry on the wisdom and legacy of the farmers, sharecroppers, herbalists, preachers, and conjuring prayer warriors of her bloodline. Victoria, also affectionately known as Moyo, is an initiated and trained priestess, interfaith chaplain, full spectrum birthkeeper, deathkeeper, yoga and meditation teacher, clinical herbalist, and pelvic steam herbalist. Additionally, she also weaves future visions into ancestral wisdom as a Juju storyteller and Afrofuturist. My people. Most importantly, Victoria is a lifelong scholar and artist. Through the platform of Moyo Mysteries, she assists with holistic wellness, social agency, and cultural empowerment to hoodoos. Through guided cycles, she teaches death work, grief work, mental wellness for diverse populations for the purpose of preserving and expanding the ways we explore the ecosystem of death and venerate the dead. Through Spiral Birth, Victoria also teaches holistic birth work and reproductive wellness that centers on reproductive birth justice by elevating ancestral connections and expanding full spectrum services to culturally marginalized, queer and trans, disabled, kink, imprisoned, and unhoused populations. You are a very interesting, multifaceted, deep human being, and I'm so honored to have you on today's episode of the Nine Minds Radio Show. So, we're gonna get right into these questions. I just read your bio, but tell us about who you are before we get started.
So basically, yeah, I have interest and callings that actually, but they're actually really, really connected. And that's what I've been able to different paths and see how the different ways that mental health and mental wellness, studies, and seeing how to immerse that into my mental wellness experiences and religion, and how ancestrally and culturally the historical connections that we have, especially to the grand midwives, they used all of these. It's not something that's just like, oh, you're just putting your hands in different things. This is in the African American traditions also did, and generation to generation is, how to implement religion in birth and death. Warriors, being genealogists, being herbalists, doing it babies to also doing abortion work, and also keeping up with where people were being.
Mhm.
When I was able to see, that connection in our history, a lot of the things that I end up being ancestral.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, I know how you just said everything is pretty much connected. And when you think about the ways that ancestrally we have done things, there was a time when newborns were sent to live with their grandparents and great grandparents for a while. And that's because one was just coming into this plane and another was about to exit this plane into the plane that the newborn just came from, right? So
Mhm.
we know that death and birth are so deeply connected to each other. But how and why did you get into this work? What sparked your interest to enter this arena?
So the first type of doula work that I actually came in contact with, because a lot of people, when they get into doula work, a lot of times they come into it through the birth space. I actually came into it through the death space. And that was because I was doing investigation work already in reference to death investigations, um, investigating suicides, homicides, and things, and in my previous job. And so when I was doing all of that, and a lot of times I was doing investigation work for our community, for the Black community. I was really, really like there needed to be community care and long-term care that I didn't see. So a lot of times when people are, having to navigate the fact that a loved one of theirs has died by suicide or was murdered, or, or even, with, other types of deaths, whether they were in hospice care or whatever, there was a lot of times where they had what I would call disenfranchised grief, which is the type of
Mhm.
grief where, like, the institutions and the society that we live in does not allow you to fully grieve because
Right.
you are being oppressed in certain ways. So there was a lot of times where these deaths were happening, and instead of having, enough time to sit there and plan out how, you know, um, how their loved one needed to be buried according to their wishes or what have you.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of times they were having to scramble up money, by putting out a GoFundMe, to bury their loved one. Like that was the first thing they had to do. They couldn't worry about
Mhm.
grieving right now. They had to worry about what am I going to do for my loved one to take care of their body, because nothing was in place. There
Mhm.
was no kind of will or no type of directive or anything.
Mhm.
And then the money wasn't there, for funeral expenses or what have you. And so a lot of people, they just had all kind of questions like, like, I'm not ready for this.
Mhm.
And I hated um, I just hated that for a lot of families, especially a lot of families, like I say, in the Black community. It was just like it was no um, preparation that
Mhm.
they were able to foresee, and it just put them in just a very traumatic event. Like the death was already traumatic, and
Mhm.
then having all of that happen and at the same time, it was just so much trauma and grief that I was seeing.
Mhm.
Um, and so I wanted to know how I could support that in a long-term way. And I eventually saw Afua, well, not Afua, but Alua author from Going with Grace. And I
Mhm.
saw one of her videos and I was like, that's what I've been thinking about. That's
Mhm.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
So I enrolled in her program. And then I also did Lynette Williams, diaspora death doula. She's not doing that training anymore, but I
Mhm.
did that the same year. and did some, some other things to kind of prepare me for the work. Um, and so that's how I got into death doula work. And then probably soon after, I was taking clients like part-time for a little bit.
Mhm. Mhm.
But a few of the clients that were coming to me were also coming to me in reference because, like a lot of the death doula work, and the training that we have is mostly, talking about end of life, and end of life is usually, talking about hospice and palliative care, aging, and, things like that.
Mhm.
And so I would start getting clients who were coming to me in reference to perinatal grief, like their baby had died, at birth. And so, I wanted to learn how to support that particular type of death, um,
Mhm.
more in depth. So, I took the Pell Advocate course, and some other things, and so like that kind of like helped me get into the birth workspace even more. So
Right.
that's how those two kind of connected.
That's beautiful. It takes a lot of compassion and understanding for the process and for people. And it's apparent that you have that. You took the necessary trainings, you got the support you needed to be able to support people in an authentic way that seems to be very natural for you. The compassion and the care, all of that seems to be a part of your identity, right? So I have a two-part question for you. How do birth work and death work connect to hoodoo specifically? And how do your identities connect to birth work and death work?
So hoodoo, of course, we know hoodoo as both a spiritual tradition and a religion.
Mhm.
Um, but it also it encompasses every aspect of life. So hoodoo, it encompasses our social aspects, our cultural aspects, our political aspects, and most of all, our freedom and our liberation.
Gotcha.
And with birth work, and birth work and death work, which are very sacred spaces spiritually, but also there's a lot of liberation and freedom
Mhm.
that is involved in the ways that we are birthed and also the ways that we die.
Mhm.
So, when we're talking about hoodoo, not only are we talking about the spirits and the deities and the ancestors, but we're talking about the ways that we live our life and the ways that we immerse um, these traditions and these principles and these spiritualities throughout all the aspects of our life. And so we definitely have to bring our practices into those very sacred spaces of birth and death.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and there's so much hoodoo that is immersed in those spaces. Like I
Mhm.
say, like with birth, not only is it, you know, um, a liberatory practice around how we are birthed, but also there's certain, a lot of modalities that you can and rituals that you can create around birth. There's, certain, herbs that you can, you know, um, immerse within
Mhm.
um, your birth. And there's divination methods, there's rituals for the placenta, there's prayer, and everybody has their different traditions. So not only do we have cultural traditions, but we have our family traditions as well.
Right.
There's some things that may be done in one family that's not done in another family, and vice versa. Even though we have that cultural connection there, we still have to have you know um, those differences, for our different lineages and things. And that's also a
Mhm.
part of hoodoo. Like hoodoo is, it's about Black people, Black American people, that is the tradition. But there's also different lineages of hoodoo. And that, like I say, that extends to the birth space and the death space. And because there is culture in death too. We know that there's culture in birth,
Absolutely.
but there's also culture in death. And there's a lot of things that African Americans do that that is not necessarily seen in other cultures in reference to
Right.
death. such as wearing, rest in peace shirts, which is still really popular here in the Deep South, making sure that you have like a picture of somebody who's died on, on your shirt, and their name, and like honoring them, not only, at the funeral, but also, on the day of their death or something like that. And then of course the jazz funerals that are still in New Orleans, that really came forth, out of the origin of the fact that enslaved Africans, we were enslaved, and we didn't have any kind of freedom. So like there was a lot of emphasis placed on liberation through death, and
Yes.
honoring souls and spirits, and as they depart. So we have that, and just a lot of other things that we have. There's a lot of culture around birth and death, and they can very much be seen as hoodoo influences.
Yes. I always thought that was beautiful how our culture, in a lot of spaces, we look at, view, and process death as a celebration of freedom, as a celebration of liberation, and that being related to how our ancestors made a celebration of someone's passing. You make food, you commune with your friends and family, you sit down together, y'all joke, reminisce, tell stories. My grandmother died. She passed, she transitioned a couple of years ago. And my cousins and I, we were all broken up about her passing because we were all close to her in different ways. The first grandson, he gets up on stage and he's, broken up crying. He's like, I don't know about y'all, but I was grandma's favorite. So everybody's like, he crying, but we like, and we don't, it's not a somber experience for us. We talk about it for days after the funeral. Did you see so and so? I ain't seen him in 1,000 years. Did what y'all eat at the repast? Who did the food? It's important. Those things are important. These types of cultural things that are central to us,
Absolutely.
throughout the diaspora, not just here, but everywhere. Um, how are some ways that we can elevate death work in hoodoo for those of us who are kinds of, the acting hoodoos in our families? If it's not a bunch of us, if it's just one or two of us, how can we elevate death work in the practice, in the tradition?
I think a lot of hoodoos are becoming also recreational genealogists, and genealogy is also a really big part of death work. Making sure that you are documenting the history of your family, and that is inclusive of, we're in the holiday season, taking note of a lot of the recipes, the food that your family loves to cook around this time. That's really important for, preserving your lineage and preserving, the information of your lineage. Who is related to who? What jobs are really pronounced in your family? What do people like to do? And what are some of the gifts and the talents of your family? All of that is part of genealogy work, and all of that is also part of death work, because death work is also about venerating the dead. So as people pass on, you want to make sure that you're preserving their legacy. And so that's why I also am very much about including genealogy work as part of death work. And besides that, not only learning more about the history of deaf culture and African American history, but also making sure that you have some things planned out for your death and for your family's deaths, because we all know that we're going to die, and a lot of times we like to wait, until we get older, but you never know when death is going to come knocking, and then especially for the African American community, there's so many ways in which we are targeted, and a lot of times we have these deaths that, are very unpredictable because we have so many different oppressions that happen in our life. We're very much targeted in reference to intimate partner violence. Like Black women are, they are the leading rates of homicide in the United States, gender wise. We kill more than any other women in the United States, our intimate partners. And then, of course, we have police brutality. We have, and then with the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, we had pronounced rates of dying from that. Or some of the leading cause of maternal mortality rates. So we are targeted in so many different ways when it comes to health here in the United States. So we can't afford to wait until we feel like we're getting older to do end of life planning. We have to have things in place at a much earlier, rate than you might want to think about because of all of that going on. And when you wait until the last minute, and the death happens, like I say, that's when, I see all of the chaos and all of the disenfranchised grief that often follows a lot of families because, a lot of us have not been able to be ready.
Right. And one thing I really appreciate and find very dope about this conversation is this is a sobering topic. This is not the woo-woo work, put some work together to do this and that. This is like, get your shit in order because death is going to visit every last one of us. And if we don't have at least a will, an end of life plan, let alone life insurance to pass on to our children to take care of, our rights into, our rites of passage into the ancestral realm, headstones and caskets and, burial sites and grave digging. And we don't have any of that in order. It's time to go ahead and put our feet in the dirt. Literally, when it's time to put our feet in the dirt, we got to have everything planted and ready to be harvested so we can go peacefully and not be such a strain on our children and grandchildren and partners, right? So I really appreciate that. You have a conference coming up, right? Two of them. Yeah, let's talk because I think that this is important for those of us, especially not just those of us who are getting older, but those of us who see the benefit and have a calling on our life to do work like what you're doing. To talk about these things and share this information with others so that they can get their things in order. Talk about the Black Death Work Lineage Conference.
I'm so excited about it. So like I say, I've always been very, very much, attracted to death because that's what I was doing as far as doing investigations and everything. I did that for 12 plus years before I got into this work. And so I've had boots on the ground for a good little bit in reference to, suicides and homicides and being able to see people, in hospice and palliative care and being able to see elder abuse in those places, in nursing homes. Also, I put together crisis teams, like mental health crisis teams. And a lot of those, I was dealing with people who had suicidal ideation. And also, people who were in the middle of psychosis situations and things like that. And so I've been able to see so many different ways that people are dying and also what I feel like can be preventable deaths, especially our community, because I do live in a majority Black community. And so I've been able to particularly see a lot of those things. And so I have a lot of these experiences that, I've accumulated over the years. And so when I got into death doula spaces, I saw a lot of that was not necessarily elevated in the spaces. Death doula, as a occupation and a field is still relatively new in Western society. And what I was seeing was not only, mostly about hospice and palliative care, which is really important, it's extremely important. But also,
Mm-hmm.
I did not see a lot of elements that particularly elevated African American death tradition,
Mm-hmm.
the different cultural aspects of death.
Right.
Um, it was very Eurocentric, if
Mm-hmm.
we're being honest, like very Eurocentric, very just like, hey, this is inclusive to everybody. And what I wanted to see is because I was able to see the different ways that different populations died. It was just like in this space, I want to bring that um,
Mm-hmm.
death doula work. It's like, hey, like, yes, everybody goes through death and everybody goes through grief, but also Black people die differently. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Latinx people die differently. The Native Americans die differently. The autistic population dies differently. Autistic population, especially the ones who don't have a co-occurring intellectual disability, we die
Mm-hmm.
at 9 times the rate by suicides than non-autistic people. And so all of this information, I wanted this type of information into the death workspace. And
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to start particularly with the African American, our tradition, because that's my identity.
Mm-hmm.
So I am a hoodoo, and I'm like, okay, all of this different history and stuff that I am aware of and that I've studied and I researched and then seeing things with my own eyes, there needs to be a space for that. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not seeing really a space for that, in this, right? Like we want to talk about the history of the grand midwives and how they connect to death. Because a lot of times when we talk about midwives, we only talk about them in the birthing space, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
talk, oh yeah, they were delivering babies, but they were also, involved a lot of times, with the miscarriages and abortion. So that
Mm-hmm.
aspect of the birth work. And also, yeah, they were also the genealogists. They kept up with where people were being buried, which is
Mm-hmm.
really important because enslaved Africans were being shipped off to different plantations.
Right.
Um, and also they didn't care, where they were putting bodies and stuff. So midwives were keeping up with all that information. And that's
Mm-hmm.
also the ways that Black funeral directors were a part of a lot of the different movements, like the civil rights movement. They were
Yeah.
very much heavily involved
Mm-hmm.
with the political aspect of us, gaining more rights here in the United States of America. I'm not seeing people talk about that, and
Right.
then hey, with the contemporary death justice, movements, like I say, like we die differently, and
Mm-hmm.
talking about the ways that we die differently with Black femicide, with police brutality, with the
Right.
ways that medical terrorism, the ways that we are dismissed in medical communities and then end up dying from preventable deaths because of that. Like there's no
Mm-hmm.
space that's talking about that and connecting that with a lot of our history. So that is what, I'm wanting to bring out more because I have, and I will continue to, get more experience and do boots on the ground work. But also I feel like I'm at a space where it's like, okay, I've been doing a lot of this work for a really long time. It's now time for me to try to pass on this information to other people.
Absolutely.
So, next year is also the first year that I'm doing my first death doula trainings. But for people who do not find that financially accessible, I wanted to have something because I kept seeing a lot of posts and people were just like, I want to get more involved in this. And I was like, I need to have something else that's also accessible to my people because like I don't want to just hoard things and I don't want there to be a huge paywall.
Mm-hmm.
For people. So that's when I came up with the Black Death Work Lineage Conference. It's
Mm-hmm.
2 days long, virtual conference, 20 hours worth of information. We're going to start with a lot of the different history, historical information that I was talking about in reference to those ancestral connections and just work our ways to some of the contemporary things that I'm talking about. We're
Mm-hmm.
also going to talk about inner life planning. We'll talk about cleansing first, spiritual cleansing, keeping yourself cleansed and protected. in these spaces too, because
Right.
that's also really important. Talk about the history of Black cemeteries, because it's not just about cleaning the cemeteries and doing that very, very important piece of ancestral veneration, but there's also a whole lot of rich information, historical information about African American cemeteries and how they came to be. So talking a little bit about that, talking about some of the burial societies and like the political and social implications of them, of how they existed in the United States and how they came to be, because that's something else we don't talk about a lot.
Right.
Talking about one class that I've really enjoyed teaching. I've been teaching it as an intensive, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Is reframing death and hauntings, because some of the research that I had been doing over the last couple of years, as a horror fan, I know a lot of Black people are not into horror, but
I love horror.
yeah, but a lot what's really interesting about a lot of ghost stories and a lot of urban legends is a lot of them actually involve Black people. And so when I would go on these little hunted tours, like they would, like the tours, and they were usually white. Um, like the tour guides, they were usually white, and they would usually, they would talk about, like, oh yeah, like this person was having a affair, a scandalous affair, and it turned out to be, a Black person. I'm like, that don't sound right, just like they were talking about it. And then when you go do some more deeper research, it found out, oh no, this was an enslaved African, and they were raped,
Thank you.
so
Right.
so it was just about like all these different stories that's in these little famous hunted places, that include Black people. A lot of times they're just so sensationalized, and
Yeah.
it's not
Whitewashed.
it's,
Softened up.
yeah, and it's like it's hiding a lot of the real information. And then there's a lot of um demonization of African traditions and religions on those tours too, just saying some very scandalous things about voodoo and hoodoo and things. And so once I really start digging into those different research about those different, different stories like that, it was just like, yeah, this is something that also needs to be brought up about, just how Black people are just talked about even in death. We already know that we are heavily discriminated against and oppressed in life, but even in death, they continue to, get our stories wrong,
Yeah.
and get our legacies wrong. And so I feel like this is the real, things about what's going on. And also just haints in general, like ghosts and haints and things, and just um, realizing how a lot of times that's also really important pieces of ancestral veneration. Because in part, a lot of, about like in our culture, it's really important for people to be remembered, to be celebrated, and because a lot of us were buried in unknown graves, unmarked graves, our bodies were we drowned in the ocean and things. A lot of times, spirits have not been able to be properly venerated and properly celebrated. And a lot of times that's how haints, become, haints, as far as being just, spirits that, are very disturbing to live in society. And so just really talking about that and really connecting that to a lot of different folklore, because folklore has a lot of truth in it. It has a lot of history in it. And
Yes.
so we want to bring that into the forefront as well. So all of that is going to be, things that I pack into that, that 2-day conference that I'm really excited
I
about it.
can't wait. I'm excited too. I need you to make sure you let me know when it's live so I can promote the tickets and make sure people come, because
Oh yeah, it's
it's
already live.
it's already live. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and make sure that goes in the description so we can start selling that out. And there's also to pair with that, the Black Birthwork Lineage Conference. So death work and birth work lineage conferences, and they'll be on 2 separate occasions.
Yeah, so the death work one is coming in February.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to wait and do the birth work one the year after, but I was like, no, let me go ahead and put that out there too.
Mm-hmm.
Happening in March. And that
Okay.
one is going to be 4 days, so it's 2 weekends long. It's a Saturday and Sunday, and then it's another Saturday and Sunday in March.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 40 hours. The death work lineage is probably I've already got like a 40-hour curriculum for that, but I'm going to wait
Mm-hmm.
until 25 to do that one.
Okay.
Um, but the birth work lineage, because again, well, I feel like it's a lot better in birth work spaces as far as
Mm-hmm.
being able to kind of tap into some people who are teaching a lot of the cultural
Mm-hmm.
traditions. We have Tori Tori Rodriguez. She was on the Hoodoo conference before, and then we have Divine Birth Wisdom. We have Sister Midwife. They're
I
doing a
know
lot.
all of them. I train with them too.
Yeah, like they doing
Mhm.
awesome work. But I
Yes.
kind of wanted to, just kind of add to that work that they're already doing because we still do need more spaces that's talking specifically about Black birth issues. Um,
Mhm.
so, I'll talk a lot more in depth about, the grand midwives. Um, also talk about what birth work was like on the plantations, talk about, the medical terrorism, why, there's not as many grand midwives now because it was a lot of institutionalized oppression that
Yes.
specifically targeted,
Legislation that
exactly,
did away with that whole
exactly.
process. They completely, this is what they did. I deduced this in my research. They told these grand midwives, you can't practice anymore unless you come get your certification through us. So they
Mm-hmm,
bring them in and say, show me exactly how you do things so we can check off a list and see if you're doing it right.
mm-hmm,
So as they showing them every aspect of everything that they do, because white babies at that time were dying during the labor process in very high numbers that were continuing to grow. And they said, why is it that these Black babies are living and all these white babies are dying? And come to find out, there were white OBs, white doctors who were not washing their hands before they delivered, before they caught babies, before they
mm-hmm,
reached in and pulled a baby out, before they started messing with, private parts and newborns. They weren't washing their hands. They
mm-hmm,
weren't sterilizing their devices. They had no idea how important these things were. And so here
mm-hmm,
come these Black women with all these skills and all these abilities and all this knowledge. They milked them for all the knowledge that they had during these so-called certification programs, and then made them purchase the sheet of paper to say that they can practice after they pulled all the knowledge from them in counties all across the South, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
So it's almost, and not almost, it's criminal what they did and how they did it. And if that's, the best way that you can gain knowledge, then you doomed anyway from the beginning, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I get really passionate when I talk about that, when I talk about
Absolutely.
those things, because I'm tired.
Mm-hmm.
I'm exhausted. And it's a fight that does not stop because my children have to come up in this world too. And I want to make sure that when they're looking at it, they see it through the lens of truth,
Yeah.
and not, the lens of being grounded, a
Mm-hmm.
grounded and rooted lens, and not just seeing it for what it appears to be, the illusion of it.
Absolutely.
Um, So I
Yeah.
wanna I wanna go ahead and close out, but before I do you have any other projects that you want to talk about, discuss, or let people know that you're working on, that they can either support or participate in?
Yeah. So, like I say, I have that, and that's happening in March. the registration for both of those are live already.
Mhm.
And the links are already up and everything. Early bird tickets are until January 2nd. Also, because like I say, I'm all about accessibility. So I was just like, okay, what else can I do? So there's actually a black there's the Death and Grief Toolkit for Black folks. It's a 4-hour introductory class into Black death culture, and I will talk a little bit about end of life planning. We'll talk about Black grief, and things like that. So that's actually this Thursday.
Okay.
It is, yeah, and it's a $10 donation. So,
Mhm.
that's something else for people to consider. I also have a crisis care, for crisis planning.
Mhm.
It's also domestic violence, relapse planning. That's
Mhm.
also coming up this month. Also, a
Mhm.
5-hour perinatal justice toolkit for Black folks. So, talking about birth planning, postpartum planning. Um,
Mhm.
and some really important information in reference to the birth workspace. That's also
Mhm.
this month. Registration is live for all of those. It's made to be incredibly accessible to people. And yeah, there's also going to be some Black history classes, since they act like they don't want to teach Black history in schools. So
Important.
there's a whole series of Black history classes that is going to
Mhm.
open up next year. Um, that's going to be inclusive of specifically Hoodoo Heritage Month, and a lot
Mhm.
of history that I'll connect to Hoodoo and why we say that Hoodoo is Black history. So
I'm
yeah,
gonna. Can I put my children in that class?
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, good.
Hmm.
Perfect. That's excellent. And we can find all this at moyomysteries.com.
Yeah, because it's a lot of the stuff is on some of my other sites, but I have everything linked to Moyo Mysteries because that's where a lot of people know me too.
Okay, very good. So if I go to moyomysteries.com, I can get linked to the events from there
Hmm.
on the other sites. Okay,
Yeah,
good to
that
go.
and yeah, and Instagram is in my bio, all of the
Okay,
things.
good. All right, perfect. Well, Victoria Snowden, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your words, your expertise, and your work. I honor you. We love you, and we support everything that you're doing every step of the way. So, if we want to offer donations, buy tickets for others, or sponsor any projects that you're working on, what are your pay links?
Yeah, so in my Instagram bio, I do have a donation link. And
Mhm.
also, if you want to go through the page and just contact me, I'll make sure, to divert the funds wherever you want me to put them.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. You take care. Okay. That was so good.